Hello and welcome back to What Changes. I'm May. If you are watching this, it is likely Saturday, February 7th, 2026. You might be looking at the markets, checking your portfolio, or perhaps you are just enjoying your weekend, blissfully unaware that the financial ground beneath your feet has just shifted. We often talk on this channel about the subtle shifts that alter our economic reality. But what is happening right now, at this exact moment, is not subtle. It is a seismic event. You might have noticed silver ticking up 3%, or gold moving higher late on Friday, and thought nothing of it. Maybe you assumed it was just another geopolitical rumour, or speculation about the Federal Reserve. But I am here to tell you that what you are witnessing is not a standard market move. It is a regulatory detonation. We are standing at the precipice of the largest forced liquidation event in the history of commodity markets. And unlike the market crashes of the past that were driven by retail panic or housing bubbles, this crisis is being driven by a legal deadline that the vast majority of the financial world has chosen to ignore until about 48 hours ago. That deadline is Monday morning, February 9th, 2026. The change we are discussing today is the strict enforcement of the Net Stable Funding Ratio, or NSFR, under the Basel III framework. For years, we have heard about Basel III. It has been delayed, postponed, watered down, and negotiated in backrooms for over a decade. But as of Monday, the delays are over. The Bank for International Settlements, known as the BIS, the central bank of central banks, has issued a directive that essentially says compliance is no longer optional. The memo has gone out to every major financial institution on Earth. Align your balance sheet by Monday or lose your license to operate. This is the what changes moment we have been preparing for. To understand why this is catastrophic for the current banking system, we have to look at the mechanics of the rule change. This is not just boring bureaucratic paperwork. This is a fundamental reclassification of what constitutes wealth. Under the old rules, and even during the transitional phases we have lived through recently, banks were allowed to play a very specific game with precious metals. They were allowed to treat unallocated gold and silver as low-risk assets. When we say unallocated, we are talking about paper claims. We are talking about futures contracts, synthetic ETFs, and derivatives that do not have a specific bar of metal with a serial number attached to them. Historically, banks could hold massive short positions in the Comex silver market or the London bullion market using these unallocated positions. They required minimal capital reserves to back them up because they were classified as Tier 2 or Tier 3 assets. It was cheap, easy leverage. But the rule that activates this Monday changes the physics of the market. Under the new NSFR rule, unallocated precious metals are being reclassified. They are now officially designated as high volatility illiquid assets. And here is the kicker. Holding these assets now requires an 85% cash reserve. Let me break down what that means in actual dollars, because the math is staggering. If a major bullion bank is holding a $1 billion short position in paper silver, as of Monday morning, they are required to have $850 million in Tier 1 capital sitting in their vaults to back that position. Tier 1 capital means cash or allocated physical reserves. Compare this to the treatment of allocated physical gold and silver. Physical metal, held in your name, is now classified as a Tier 1 asset with a 0 risk weight. It requires 0 additional capital reserves. The regulatory incentive structure of the global banking system has just flipped 180 degrees. For the last 15 years, major bullion banks have manipulated the paper price of silver and gold by creating an infinite synthetic supply. They could print paper contracts to smash the price down whenever they wanted, but now they are staring at a balance sheet crisis. They are non-compliant. They violate the BIS rules, and the penalties for this are not a slap on the wrist or a manageable fine. The penalties include license revocation and being cut off from the Federal Reserve discount window. They could be barred from operating within the European banking system. So, what changes for these banks? They have run out of options. They essentially have to convert their paper positions into physical metal. They have to cover their shorts. They have to buy actual metal, and they have to do it before the markets open on Monday. This brings us to the most terrifying aspect of this situation. The numbers simply do not add up. Let's look at the data as of the market close on Friday, February 6th. The total open interest in Comex silver futures was 412,000 contracts. Since each contract represents 5,000 ounces, we are talking about 2.06 billion ounces of paper silver. To put that in perspective, the total annual global mine production of silver is only about 850 million ounces. The paper market on the New York Exchange alone represents 2.5 years of total global supply. But here is where the supply squeeze becomes a systemic failure. We have to look at the registered silver, the actual physical metal sitting in Comex vaults that is available for delivery. As of Friday night, that number was only 64 million ounces. When you do the math, dividing the 2.06 billion ounces of paper claims by the 64 million ounces of actual metal, you get a leverage ratio of 32 to 1. There are 32 paper claims for every single ounce of real silver in the vault. On Monday morning, the BIS is demanding that these banks back those 32 paper claims with cash or physical metal. But there is not enough physical silver on planet Earth to cover even 10% of those outstanding claims. This is not just a short squeeze. This is a mathematical impossibility that is about to collide with reality. We saw the first signs of this panic on Friday afternoon. If you were watching the charts, specifically at 2:47 p.m. Eastern Time, you saw silver spike from roughly $29 to $31 in a 4-minute window. The mainstream financial media, CNBC, Bloomberg, they were telling you this was retail demand or tensions in the Middle East. That is a fabrication. What happened at 2:47 p.m. was the first wave of algorithmic covering by European banks trying to get ahead of the Monday deadline. We know this because of the trade volume data from the SLV ETF, the largest silver-backed exchange-traded fund. At exactly 2:48 p.m., there was a block trade of 14 million shares. That is not retail investors on Robinhood. That is institutional panic buying. By the close of the day, SLV had accumulated $63 million in net inflows in a single session, the largest single-day inflow since the COVID lockdowns began in March of 2020. The smart money is already moving. They are trying to exit the paper market and secure physical backing before the regulatory hammer drops. To truly understand the gravity of this what changes moment, we need to dive deeper into the mechanics of the NSFR calculation. The BIS categorizes assets based on stability and liquidity over a 1-year horizon. Tier 1 assets are cash, central bank reserves, and now allocated physical gold and silver. These require 0 reserves. Tier 2 assets like corporate bonds require partial reserves. But by reclassifying unallocated metals as Tier 3, high volatility assets, the BIS has essentially made the business model of modern bullion banking illegal, or at least prohibitively expensive. Banks that have been holding $10 billion short positions now need $8.5 billion in liquid cash to keep those positions open. Most of these banks do not have that kind of liquidity. They have been operating on the assumption that they could roll over these shorts indefinitely. Now they are trapped in a position known in chess as Zugzwang, where every move they make worsens their position. Option 1. They liquidate their short positions by buying back the futures contracts. If they do this, they drive the price of silver vertically because there is no sell-side liquidity. Option 2. They take delivery of physical metal to convert their unallocated positions to allocated ones. But as we established, there are only 64 million ounces available against billions in claims. Option 3. They raise billions in fresh capital. But with the Fed managing its own balance sheet issues after the repo crisis of late 2025, liquidity is scarce. The inescapable conclusion is that the price of silver is about to detach from the paper price and reflect true scarcity. We are looking at a market where paper claims exceed physical reality by a factor of 15 to 1 on a global scale. 30 billion ounces of paper claims against 2 billion ounces of above-ground investment-grade silver. When the banks are forced to reconcile this on Monday, the fractional reserve system collapses. But why is this happening now? Why would the BIS and the central banks trigger such a chaotic event? This is where the geopolitical angle becomes critical. This is not just about silver. This is about the structural integrity of the dollar-based financial system. The central banks know the system is fragile. They know the repo market issues of 2019 were never solved. They see the commercial real estate implosion and the illiquidity in the treasury market. The NSFR rule is a deliberate move to transition the banking system toward real assets. The BIS is signaling that if you want to remain part of the global financial order, your balance sheet must be backed by real value, not synthetic leverage. This is a return to collateral reality. There is evidence that the central banks have been preparing for this specific week for years. In 2019, the BIS quietly reclassified physical gold as a Tier 1 asset, making it equivalent to cash. The media ignored it, but the central banks did not. Since then, central bank gold buying has hit historic highs. In 2022, they bought over 1,000 metric tons. In 2023, another 1,000 tons. China alone added over 400 metric tons to its official reserves in 2025. These institutions have been front-running the very regulation they are now enforcing. They knew that physical precious metals were destined to become the only Tier 1 asset immune to inflation and counterparty risk. While Western banks played games with paper derivatives, the East, specifically China, Russia, and the BRICS nations, has been accumulating the physical metal. In 2024 alone, China imported over 7,000 metric tons of silver, which is roughly 225 million ounces, or 25% of total global mine production. They aren't turning this into jewelry. This is strategic accumulation. China understands that silver is an industrial necessity for the green energy transition, for 5G, and for military technology. They have used the artificially suppressed paper price, maintained by Western banks, to drain the global supply of physical metal. Now, as the Basel III rules come into strict enforcement, we are witnessing a geopolitical realignment. The West holds the paper shorts, the East holds the physical long positions. It represents a massive transfer of wealth and financial power. The countries with the hard assets will emerge as the new financial superpowers, while those clinging to synthetic leverage face insolvency. So, what is the situation on the ground right now, this weekend? If you go to your local bullion dealer, you will likely find a very different reality than what the spot price suggests. Reports are flooding in that dealers are sold out of silver eagles, maple leafs, and generic rounds. Premiums are exploding. The paper price might say $29 or $31, but the real price, the price to actually hold the metal, is already 10 to 15% higher. By next Wednesday, after the banks have scrambled for compliance, that premium could be 30% or more. This disconnect between the paper price and the physical price is the hallmark of a market failure. We have seen this movie before. In 2008, during the financial crisis, premiums on silver skyrocketed while the paper price crashed. The US Mint ran out of blanks. But the crisis of 2026 is orders of magnitude larger, because it is not about subprime mortgages, it is about the solvency of the bullion banks themselves. We also have the precedent of 2011, when silver hit $49. That was driven by a temporary supply squeeze and ETF demand. But in 2011, the banks could change the rules. They raised margin requirements and flooded the market with paper to crash the price. In 2026, they cannot do that. The BIS has removed its ability to cheat. The NSFR requirement is not negotiable. They cannot spoof the market with fake sell orders because every order now requires capital backing. The algorithm that suppressed prices for 15 years is effectively broken. Let's look even further back to understand the scale of what is happening. In 1933, President Roosevelt confiscated gold and revalued it to recapitalize a bankrupt banking system. It was a wealth transfer from the public to the state. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window because the US had printed more paper dollars than it had gold to back them. The result was gold going from $35 to $850, a 24 times increase. Today, we're at the same inflection point. The fractional reserve system of silver trading has issued 30 billion ounces of paper against 2 billion ounces of metal. The NSFR rule is the catalyst that forces a reconciliation. The paper price and physical price must diverge, and the physical price will go parabolic to reflect reality. So, what happens next? Let's walk through the timeline for the next 72 hours. It is Saturday night. The markets are closed. But the boardrooms of JP Morgan, Citibank, and Deutsche Bank are likely chaotic. They are calculating their ratios and realizing they are short. When the futures market opens on Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern, expect volatility. The banks have three bad options: buy back futures, take physical delivery, or raise emergency capital. All three lead to higher prices. We could see silver spike to $35 or $38 in the overnight session. By the time New York opens on Monday morning, we could be looking at $40 an ounce. However, there is a wild card scenario we must consider. If a major bullion bank cannot meet its obligations and declares force majeure, stating they cannot deliver metal due to circumstances beyond their control, the Comex system effectively breaks. If that happens, paper contracts become unenforceable. The futures market could shut down. In that vacuum, the only price that matters is what a physical holder is willing to sell for. That price could gap to $80, $100, or even $150 in a matter of days. This sounds extreme, I know. But remember, the BIS has the authority to revoke banking licenses for non-compliance. Loss of access to the Fed discount window or European clearing systems is a death sentence for a bank. The system is built on a web of counterparty risk. If one major player fails, the chain snaps. The BIS acts as the architect of this reset. They are not trying to save the current casino-style market. They are preparing for the next system, one backed by real assets. They are quietly changing the rules so that the only survivors are those holding physical value. So what should you do? This is the question everyone asks. The window for action is closing rapidly. If you do not own physical silver or gold, the source material suggests immediate action. Not paper ETFs like SLV or GLD, but actual possession. By the time the mainstream media acknowledges the crisis on Monday or Tuesday, dealer inventory will be gone, and premiums will be insurmountable. If you already own physical metal, the advice is simple: do not sell. Do not be tempted by a spike to $50 or $60. This is a structural shift, not a temporary bubble. We are moving from a paper-based market to a physical-only market. In that new paradigm, the value of scarcity is multiples higher than what we see today. Let's summarize the 10 key points that define this moment, as laid out by the data. Number 1. The NSFR rule under Basel III enters strict enforcement on Monday, February 9th, 2026. Number 2. Banks must hold 85% Tier 1 capital against unallocated positions. Number 3. The banks are massively short and lack the capital or physical metal to comply. Number 4. Their only options, covering shorts, taking delivery, or raising capital, all drive prices up. Number 5. Compliance failure risks license revocation and systemic collapse. Number 6. Central banks have front-run this event by hoarding physical gold. Number 7. Geopolitics is shifting power to nations with hard assets. Number 8. History proves that when paper claims hit physical walls, prices go parabolic. Number 9. The timeline is immediate, with less than 36 hours remaining. Number 10. You must position yourself before the market opens. We are living through history. This is the moment when the paper markets finally break and physical reality takes over. This is the end of decades of price suppression. The banks are scrambling, the regulators are watching, and the smart money has already moved. I will be monitoring the markets closely as they open on Sunday night and throughout the chaos of Monday morning. If force majeure is declared, or if we see significant exchange disruptions, I will update you immediately. But for now, understand that the rules have changed. The game of synthetic leverage is over. Thank you for watching What Changes. Stay vigilant, stay positioned, and I will see you in the next update.